It's an amazing pleasure to be on this stage as we learn for the third time and the second time for a TEDxVarna talk. Thank you so much for the invitation. Fantastic pleasure to be here. How's everyone doing? I really wanted to ask you, how are you doing, guys? You having a good time today? I can see that you are. Nice one. There you go, nice one. Because theoretically, every 1 in 6 people here in this room is fighting either a mental or a substance use disorder of some sort. And is 20 times as likely as the rest of us here, the rest of the people here, not us, the rest of the people here to commit suicide. There are over 1.1 billion people in the world at the moment who are diagnosed with mental or a substance use disorder. Over 300 million of them have a diagnosis for depression. Another 300 million or so are diagnosed with anxiety disorders, which are often accompanied by depressive symptoms as well. Now, what makes these numbers even more worrisome is the fact that the cases of depression have been growing exponentially over the last few years. The Blue Cross Blue Shield Association of the US published data on 41 million people for the period of 2013-2016. That shows that there's been an incredible 63% increase in the rates of depression in children aged 12 to 17, a 47% increase in millennials, people my age, 18 to 34, a 26% increase for the people aged 35 to 47, and a 23% increase for the next age group. Now, these are really shocking numbers that illustrate the looming, borderline epidemic situation. Now, one of the scariest things about depression as a disease is that we largely don't understand it. We don't know how to treat it. We don't know what causes it. At the moment, there are over 100 million people out there who are suffering with treatment-resistant depression, and they have no hope for recovery. 50 to 60% of the people who are put on medication for depression will not respond to the treatment. And 50% of the people who do achieve some form of recovery through meds will go on to have a relapse. And 80% of the people who have had a relapse will continue to have them for the rest of their lives. They'll go on to live with this. See, another really frightening thing about this disease is that it's not a mere spell of bad days, you know. It's not like the whole world seems to be against you. It's not like losing a friend or a relative. These are normal things in life. Depression deprives you of the ability to experience life like you once did. That goes for friends, work, relationships, ambitions, etc. Depression deprives you of your own self, metaphorically, and sometimes, unfortunately, literally. This stage is a real trip, by the way. Okay, cool. Every 40 seconds, a person on this planet takes their own life. It's a scary statistic, isn't it? And in 90% of the cases, the suicide is due to depression or a substance use disorder. The World Health Organization predicts that those 40 seconds will be shrinked to mere 20 by the year 2020. That's next year. Very, very close. Now, it's very clear that we have a really serious global problem on our hands, our generation, and as we saw, not only our generation. The good news is that there seems to be quite a bright light on the horizon. See, 2 years ago, I stood, as we said, on this stage with the aim to spread the word about psychedelics. The so-called magic mushroom, the psilocybin mushroom in particular, has been used by our kind for millennia, for different purposes and in different settings. And only recently have we started to see real scientific evidence showing that the psilocybin mushroom could be significantly more effective in treating depression, including treatment-resistant depression, than all available forms of therapy that we currently have. Now, it's really awesome that only 2 years after I gave this talk and discussed psychedelics as a highly novel and highly controversial topic, we are already seeing tectonic shifts in our collective perception of psychedelics. See, a few months ago, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA in the US, granted breakthrough therapy status to a psilocybin-based drug, magic mushroom-based drug, made by a private London-based company called Compass Pathways. Now, this is a huge deal. Breakthrough therapy is granted only in cases when a drug is A, intended to treat serious and life-threatening diseases, and B, when preliminary evidence indicates that this drug could indeed be significantly more effective than all available forms of therapy. Awesome stuff. The FDA and the European Medicines Agency gave Compass Pathways the green light to start one of the largest, and if not the largest, clinical trials ever to assess the medicinal properties of a psychoactive substance in depressed subjects. What this all means is that the FDA and the EMA, the European Medicines Agency, are very much convinced by early evidence the psychedelics, magic mushrooms in particular, could indeed be a revolutionary instrument. There's a very good chance that in the next year or two, we'll see the adoption of the so-called magic mushroom as a legal and approved instrument in therapy for depression. And this alone is a huge step towards the fight with this disease. However, these developments and the media coverage have led many, including myself, to believe that psychedelics, magic mushrooms, will turn out to be the ultimate weapon, the ultimate remedy and cure that we have in the battle for eradicating depression at a global scale. However, many questions remain unanswered. For example, we can't know when and if for certain psychedelics will indeed be adopted as a tool in therapy. We can't know how much such therapy will cost, It's very unlikely that it will be available uniformly in the countries around the world. It's very much likely that it will be available only in certain places. Furthermore, we are not tackling the causes and the early symptoms of depression, but we are rather looking forward to yet another drug to treat an already existing life-threatening condition. And even more, early evidence indicates that not all patients are uniformly relieved from their symptoms following a psychedelic session. Their remission periods are different, they need to redose, and the effects vary from person to person. And lastly, but certainly not least, what do we do about the fact that over 37% of people do not share about their disease? They do not seek help, mainly out of fear that they'll lose their jobs, they'll lose lovers, friends, social standing, money, etc. They feel ashamed. See, I couldn't help but ask all those questions one night when I was lying in my bed after 8 really, really horrific months of fighting a major depressive disorder. I'd spent the majority of those months tucked up in my bed, isolated from the entire world and from myself, wishing I wasn't alive. Now, if I tried to explain what depression feels like, even though I've got a master's degree in psychology, I would fail miserably, because just like the psychedelic experience, the personal experience of depression is something that can hardly be put into words. Suffice to say that the illness cost me my job at the time, cost me a great deal of social connections and opportunities, cost my family a great deal of pain, suffering, time, and money, and fear for my life. I had tried different forms of therapy, interpersonal therapy, and I wasn't responding to any. I was firmly refusing to take medication for my disease because, from what I know, medication can only help you be a little bit more functional in your daily life. But it certainly will not provide me with a long-term solution, which was what I was looking for. So there you go. After consulting with multiple therapists and clinicians who were well aware of the specifics of my condition, and after reading through all scientific papers on the subject that I could find on the internet, I finally decided to give psychedelics a go. I followed all the guidelines. I lied in my bed, eyes closed, expecting literally anything. I took a 2.5 gram dose of psilocybin mushrooms, and literally just lie there and expected what was going to ensue. Didn't know what I was expecting, actually. And guess what? Guess what? It worked. It worked actually quite well, just the way they describe it in the scientific papers, but only to a certain extent. Excuse me? Only to a certain extent. It wasn't like I woke up on the next day depression-free or anything. The best way I can describe it is that the 2.5 gram dose granted me 2.5 hours in which the depressive thoughts that kept me in a depressed state for so many months suddenly became just ordinary thoughts with the same emotional value as the thoughts that we go through when deciding what to wear and what to have for breakfast. Now, this allowed me to view them objectively, examine the root causes, see how they originated in the first place, see what made them so terrible for me, and see what actions I could take next to not be depressed by those thoughts anymore. If I said the psychedelics cured my depression, unfortunately, that would be a lie. Psychedelics the psilocybin mushroom did provide me with a level of relief from the emotions that depression is usually associated with. However, the feelings of shame, guilt, worthlessness, apathy for life were pretty much still there in the days and weeks following the session. They were somewhat reduced, but they were still there. The trip showed me that there was indeed light at the end of the tunnel, which I had almost given up on, and that I needed to do certain things in order to pull myself out, which thankfully I was able to do. However, I was certainly not on my own. Had it not been for my parents and my girlfriends, really round-the-clock support, it's extremely likely that I would have stayed depressed despite the flicker of clarity the trip provided me with. And I want to really underline something very thickly here, that I identified the presence and the support of my girlfriend and my parents as the single greatest cure I had in this fight. Their willingness, 24/7 willingness to sit with me, to be with me, to care for me, to support me, to talk with me, and just be there with me in my mental hell, made the real difference in the fight. And when the psychedelic experience peeled off some of the layers of my depression, my parents and my girlfriend were the engine of my subsequent recovery, for I was still very much doubtful of achieving full recovery despite the psychedelic experience. I was still not responding to therapy. It took me 2 more months to start to feel normal again and respond to CBT. The support of my closest ones was the reason I held on for 8 months of mental torment without attempting to take my own life. Their continued care and attention were the reason I found the courage to take psychedelics in the first place. Because even for someone who has had quite a bit of experience with psychedelics previously, taking a psychedelic while your brain is depressed is certainly not the first thing that you'd like to do when you have this disease. And to tell you the truth, in all those months, I rarely dreamt of a magical drug that would just help me, cure me, make me normal again. Because I was realizing that depression is a lot more complex than that. In all those months, I wished for understanding. I wished for care, compassion, support. Just like people with a broken limb do. And I can't help but ask, why on earth are we so willing to help a person with a broken limb, but we literally freeze up and bolt the moment we realize that we have a friend or a person opposite of us fighting depression? See, 2 years ago, I stood on this almost the same stage with the aim to lift the stigma, to fight the stigma surrounding psychedelics, for I had got to know the potential they hold for personal development and therapy. 2 years on, I now feel that it's a lot easier to start up a conversation about a substance that is still very much illegal in most parts of the world, it can allegedly meet you with aliens, than it is to actually talk about the disease that this substance is intended to treat. And this is the problem that I came to address today. Fighting the stigma on mental health was actually one of the core aims of the World Health Organization's Mental Health Action Plan for the 2013-2020. After having gone through MDD myself, I'm now entirely convinced that this aim failed spectacularly. See, one of the really worst things about depression is that it isolates you from the world. Because at large, the world seems to not be ready for anyone's depression, really. People who haven't known your regular self for years literally evaporate the moment they realize you're struggling with mental health problems. It is this isolation and not the lack of effective treatment that nails you much deeper into darkness and doubt. The inability to share what I was going through in all those months out of fear the society will label me as weak, weird, mentally sick, broken and whatnot, was the greatest impairment towards making recovery, on the road to recovery. Proactive interpersonal support for each other, I believe, is the greatest resource we currently lack in the fight with depression and our global effort for eradicating this disease for good. We need to learn to accept the illness and be there for those who have it. See, unlike psychedelics, therapy, and medication, social support has always been named as one of the things almost all people with depression or mental health issues benefit from. Social support is critical in terms of both recovery and staying well. So, social support is important in fending depression off once you've had it, because many people will have it again once they've had it. However, people coping with the disease continue to report fewer supportive friends and relatives, less contact with their friends and relatives, less satisfaction with the contact they have with relatives and friends and their lovers, less marital satisfaction, and they confide less in their partners. Now, I can tell you from personal experience that these are all quite correct. Less than 5 people in my non-girlfriend, non-family social circle showed any compassion or even interest when I told them that I was fighting with a life-threatening illness. Only when my very best friend from childhood stood by and actively supported me, for which I do thank him. I know that there's millions and millions and millions of people out there who are struggling with the same thing. And it's up to us to start changing this for good, to start shifting the tides in mental health. As someone who has been in the depths of despair, in the depths of the psychedelic realm, I'm here to say that I don't believe the psychedelics will be the ultimate weapon in this fight. They will undoubtedly revolutionize and reshape our entire approach to medicine, therapy, mental health. Revolutionize it. However, I do believe that the strongest weapons that we have in this fight are already within us. It's up to us to start using them. They're called understanding, compassion, and love. So here's my appeal for anyone who will ever come into contact with this lecture. For anyone out there currently fighting a mental health disorder, depression, who has been through the fight and has come through the other side, I challenge you guys to come out, find a way, step out, and share your story. The world needs to learn what these diseases, what mental issues feel like and what they do. It's up to us to do that. And to anyone who has a really good chance in coming across depression, either through a relative or through their own disease, I challenge you to try and understand, be compassionate. For you never know when your support will prove to be the life-saving straw of a drug that a person needs. Thank you so much.